Welcome to the Philip Wiley Show. Take a look behind the curtain of professional hacking and hear compelling discussions with guests from diverse backgrounds who share a common curiosity and passion for challenges and their job. And now, here's your host, offensive security professional, educator, mentor, and author, Philip Wiley.
Hello and welcome to another episode. Today I'm excited to have Lilly joining. Lilly and I met at Atlantic Security Conference back several months ago. It was my first time speaking in Canada. I'd been submitting CFPs and never got accepted, and finally got accepted there. And it was kind of interesting while I was there. A friend of mine, Julian Richard, which is a previous guest on the podcast, we ran into each other for the first time. And I was kind of commenting because I usually go to conferences and see a lot of people I know. And there was some people, but not a whole lot. And I told Julian, I said, I definitely got to make more Canadian friends. And he introduced me to people. And fortunately, one of them was Lilly, along with some other amazing folks. So I came away with a lot more Canadian friends, which is awesome. And so I got to see Lilly's talk there, which was really amazing. We'll get into more of the details of that. I was super impressed. Out of all the talks there, I was probably more impressed. And one of the other talks was pretty impressive, but just your skills and knowledge and what you do is really just amazing. And so thank you for joining today.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I really thought your wrestling background when I met you there at the conference was super cool. Well, my man, he's we're technically married legally, common law, but he is a big fan of wrestling. Undertaker. He has like a gazillion replica belts downstairs. Cool. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I shared with you. I don't know if I shared with you at the conference or not, but I went to school with the Undertaker.
Yeah, I think you did mention that. It's Mark Calloway, if I remember the name correctly. Is that correct?
Calloway. Yeah, Calloway.
Yeah. Send him my apologies.
That's okay. I doubt he's listened to this anyway, so it would be kind of cool if he did. But yeah, we haven't spoken in a long time. It would be interesting to talk to him at some point. So before we get too far into it, why don't you introduce yourself for our guests?
So my name is Lilly Chalupowski. You may know me from the Twitter space as Cerberus. I am a malware reverse engineer working on mostly criminal malware, so e-crime malware in particular. And I've reversed many different malware families, from Redline Stealer to Solar Marker to I can't really count at this point how many, but I also do live Twitch streams in regards to reverse engineering malware. I write several open source projects as well to aid in the detection and extraction of intelligence from malware that I have on GitHub, some more popular than others, of course. And that's pretty much me in a nutshell. Oh yeah, and I play guitar on my streams too, if you enjoy that. So
cool.
And blog and all that stuff. And YouTube.
So electric or acoustic guitar?
I mainly gravitate towards the electric because it's easier on the fingers. Yeah.
Very cool. I have to check that out. Pretty interesting to. I can't recall any other musicians I've had on the podcast, but very cool.
Yeah, it's fun. It's kind of half of my origin story, I guess.
Very cool. Speaking of origin stories, if you wouldn't mind sharing your hacker origin story, kind of, how you got started all this and just kind of what you've done throughout your career.
Yeah, sure. I can mention how I got started. So pretty much early on, I went to university. I was going to be interested in computer science, right, which is pretty much what I was looking to get into. What sparked that was I would play some pranks on library computers and then watch people throw their mouse and keyboard around in absolute frustration. I got quite a kick out of that. It wasn't anything super nefarious. It was just being a little bit mischievous, I suppose. And I used to as well, what kind of got me into it was programming on I don't know if you remember these TI-83 graphing calculators from years ago. I was so sick and tired of, solving quadratic roots for math that I just decided to write my own program in the graphing calculator to solve both imaginary and real roots or whatever, right? Just quadratic roots. And I would share this with people over link cable. People were asking for it. So just do not use it during the test or I could be in big trouble. Look up during the test, guess who's using it? Well, pretty well everybody to verify their work during the test. I'm like, but I had to look up and try not to, make it look like I'm looking at what other people are doing, because that could be considered, of course, cheating in academics, right? But I was just hoping that no one was using it, but everyone was using it, which is just crazy. From there, then I applied to go to university, of course. When I grew up, the main thing was you got to go to university, right? Go to university, get a job, and you're going to be successful. That's it. But this was hard pushed when I was, growing up. From there, I moved into these program for computer science. And during the first year, I just was not doing well in discrete mathematics at all. Super bad. So like failing bad, like below 50%, we're talking like small numbers, not single digits. Luckily, I still had, at least 2 digits there, right? But not super well. From there, I did have an encounter with a professor who, stated, if you're not going to be good at discrete mathematics, then you're not going to succeed with computers. And so I took that advice from, an older, more experienced individual as, I better listen to what this guy is saying, or I'm going to be in big trouble here. So I do that, right? And I switch majors into music. So mainly focused on audio recording and studio production, things like that. So I jump into that. I asked them, there are opportunities in here. We're good. Things are going to be great. Things are going to be good for me after this. Like, oh yeah. So, I did the whole thing. I took some classical musical training and started doing guitar, like classical guitar pieces and things like that at that time. And then I graduated. We're just going to jump right to the end. So I graduated with a bachelor's degree in music, focus on recording. And so after that, then I started looking for these jobs at different, recording studios, or could be anything, right? TV production, radio production, things like that. However, that I was completely unsuccessful. And to be honest, my audio skills were not necessarily, I was starting to find out, as marketable as I originally thought they would be. And also based on the information I received about there being ample opportunities. From there, I pretty well, this was pretty much at the time after just after 2008 crash, the housing market. During my university years, about halfway through, they were like, university is not the thing anymore. College is, and in Canada, that's like a 2-year program, way cheaper, way cheaper. And they're like, yeah, you definitely don't want to go to university now. I was like, oh man, do I just like, I'm almost done this one. Do I keep going? Do I just drop out? I was eating my sub at Subway. I remember the time very specifically. So I decided to keep going because, like, hell, I'm no quitter, right? I'm just gonna keep pushing. So yeah, I did, and eventually, I wasn't able to get anything in audio. Right, I worked at a gaming studio on, I think it was Madden 13. On the Wii, doing some audio stuff there, editing some samples for that. And also, I was like paid, I don't know, I think it was like 11 to 12 bucks an hour for a $40,000 degree, which is just like insanity. And then similarly as well, I worked at a radio station part-time for a bit. And I had these odd jobs, right? 11 to 12 bucks an hour. Sure, it was above minimum wage at the time, but it wasn't going to pay off all that debt. So eventually, that debt was rather crippling. And I ended up, these jobs were short jobs, contract wasn't really good. And I ended up really down on my luck. And I also worked at call centers, thank you for calling PC Plus Points. This is Lilly speaking. How may I help you today? That was crazy. And yeah, then I ended up being down on my luck at one point where I ended up on a government assistance program because I had no opportunities. Those kind of like really just dried up for me. So everything was pretty much, rock bottom. There's no income, there's no prospects, nothing. But then since your student loans go to the federal government, doesn't matter, right? There's no claiming bankruptcy at this point, right, for students, which kind of put me in a really hard position, being so destitute. I used to live in an attic. At one point, I washed my clothes with my feet in the shower and ate TV dinners and Eggos. And that was all I could afford. And there were times where I had to like sell my grandmother had passed away, and I had to sell my washer and dryer to fix my car so I can get to my minimum wage job, which I could barely afford to do. Whatever. So what I'm trying to do is set the basis. Like, I was pretty destitute at that point. But I'll tell you where the turning point was. The turning point was when I was working at one of these call centers. I had met my husband, which I'm with now, right? My common law partner, why I call him my husband. We might as well be anyway. And, I started seeing these DEF CON YouTube. And I kept seeing how cool these hackers were. And I was like, wow, and I had this, I would use Linux and play around with Linux. So that was so fun. And I was like, you really think I could learn to do any of that? I highly doubt it. Anyway, I attempted to, since there was no opportunities, right, that I knew of at the time, I just took all kinds of online Udemy courses and then I just started getting addicted to learning about it because, these Udemy courses was all I could really afford as far as like learning, right? For learning. So yeah, I jumped into that, and yeah, I wanted to start my own pen testing company for smaller businesses because I thought, smaller businesses, those guys need some help too. And, that did not go over well, but I did learn a lot during that process. I'm not a good salesperson. I couldn't sell anything to anyone, in all honesty. But once that settled in, or I did end up going to a cybersecurity meetup in my local area in Halifax called called HASK. It's like I don't think it's going currently today, but at the time I met some key people. So I did meet Travis Barlow, who runs or is on the board for the Atlanta Security Conference, the one that we met at, right? So from there, I started trying to showcase some of my skills, and people were interested enough that I ended up getting hired at a local company. Well, not a local company, but a company called Go Secure. And then I moved into that. And that's kind of how I started getting into cyber. That's a long-winded story. So I think, it was a combination of being inspired, right? I think we talked about this before we started recording, right? Being inspired by seeing these people at DEF CON doing cool stuff that I felt like, I'll never be able to do that, but I'm going to try. Right. And then getting there. But that's kind of how I got my foot in the door, is through going to these meetups and practicing and watching these videos, and, just constantly trying, right, to push myself forward in that direction, because it rekindled that interest for me in computers when, right, I thought computers were just done for me, right? And as well, of course, I had some help pushing me in the direction of computers by usually when you're on assistance programs, they'll assign you something called a caseworker. She said, no, this is kind of a decent industry. Maybe just try again, but just on your own. So, there's, I like to go back and say, hey, thank you so much for the help, making me, feel more confident, and say thank you. But there's, I can't even remember her name, but yeah, I think I talked a whole lot there. But that's how I ended up getting into cyber, at least to start, get my foot in the door.
Well, that's good. And details are good. Sometimes if we don't explain stuff enough, then people miss out on some important elements, and very encouraging that where you were just kind of in a bad place and you're able to come back from it. Because it seems like at times that's the most difficult times, is when you're going through those tough times like that, to keep pushing when, you have to do that. But, those are very difficult times. And, I'm sure there's probably some listeners out there that they're listening to this now that may be going through a tough time, and just kind of seeing how someone like yourself pushed through it and overcame is very inspiring.
Well, yeah, I'm glad it's inspiring for others. If that's how they feel. For me, it's just just part of my life, right? Where it's hard to get over. So I think there's some key takeaways on things that I learned from all of that. Things that I would look at differently, things I would probably do differently, and I'm suspecting these are going to be some points that your viewers are going to want to hear.
And I'm sure you probably learned a lot about yourself, kind of your limits, and how you can push yourself further than you probably realized, I would imagine.
Oh yeah. So once you hit pretty well rock bottom, it depends where you live, right? So here in Canada, there's the government assistance programs, things like that, to help push you back onto your feet. it depends where you are, what part of the world. Sometimes there's safety nets, sometimes there's not. I was just very fortunate that there was some kind of safety net, or else I would have been in a whole lot of trouble. But yeah, the things I would do differently. So I have a couple of notes here. I'm going to have a quick peek at. So learning that I thought, it's going to be linear, right? Go to university, you go take your degree, right? You get, qualified, certified, whatever, for the thing that you're interested in. You come out, you get a job, you live happily ever after. That is grossly simplified, right? It's kind of like, when I was young and less, maybe it's a bad word, cynical. I'm not sure what word to use. Realistic, maybe. I learned that, just because I had a degree in music, or perhaps that maybe I'm okay at it, or somewhat good at it, or good at it. I mean, it's subjective. You can watch my guitar playing if you like and make your own judgment, that I was going to make it, right? But the opportunities in that were so little, or the competition was so high, that the probability or the likelihood of me succeeding in that was severely hindered. So like contract work here and there for very little pay, right? So yeah, that did not end up working out for me. In hindsight, if I go back and look at it, I would try to find the opportunities that increase the likelihood of me having a chance, right? So there's, what's hot right now, well, at least in 2016, cyber is pretty damn hot, right? I think it still is, and I do like computers, right? So being able to find what I'm passionate about in the opportunities that are out there was, I think, in part of that success, right? What does the world want, right? Do I like something in that I can excel at and can be competitive with? And, that's setting a bit more of a realistic expectation for yourself about the world when you go out into it. For the most part, right? It's I came up feeling like, oh, I finished this, so I deserve, these things. But yeah, the economy in the world's a funny place. So they want, and it depends. So that was a hard pill to swallow for me growing up, at least in my 20s. This was in my 20s. So from let's say age 20 to age 30, these were the types of realizations that I started having about how the world currently works, as far as, where I live in Canada, or, I suppose it's somewhat similar in the United States, right? It's going to be based on, money and, the interest of, where the jobs are, where the opportunities are. Is there a need, right? Cybersecurity is a big need. If you don't have it, you better get it. So the other thing too, learning during that period of my life, I would say, would be having a healthier relationship with your failures, or a healthy relationship for failure in general. So looking back at it, there were sometimes, like, I remember in school, right, you would get that math homework, or English homework, French homework. It doesn't matter what it was, right? You get it, you work on it, and there would be times that I had felt like I had no idea what I was doing, right? and that I would bring myself to tears as a kid, right? Looking at some of these problems and, but at the end of the day, what was I, going back and looking at those feelings, what was I afraid of, right? What's the worst that could happen? Yeah, I could fail the test. I could get like poor marks on the assignments, right? But it instilled this sense of fear in me of failing, and that severely slowed me down, I would say, because I'd always want to, succeed the first time, right? I think looking back at it, that was a very unhealthy relationship with failure, right? And then in between the years of 20 and 30, I started to realize, like, just, you hit rock bottom, whatever, right? I'm going to fail a lot, and it can't get any worse, right? So I learned to accept that kind of in that way. But looking back at it now, I would say I would look at it a wee bit differently. I would look at it as more so a part of a normal learning process, as opposed to like, I hit rock bottom, it can't get any worse, right? And that it's okay to fail, because that's just learning, right? That's learning. And yeah, so getting away from being conditioned that failure is bad, and being more conditioned to, like, if you fail and you pick yourself back up and you go back to it, you're enjoying, what you're learning, then, that's fine, right? The other thing I would have probably done differently as well is look into establishing a portfolio earlier. I can't tell you how much networking really helped. If I would have not went to that meetup, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. Like, at all. Probably not. So I would say, see if there's local events in your area, right? And, put yourself out there a little bit and socialize with others. And as far as with the opportunities that are out there, and get into these groups, get to know people, and just put yourself out there. It can be scary. And I know public speaking, at least the first bit for me, was just nerve-wracking. But, eventually you get over it. And that's my list of life lessons from what I've learned within the past 10 years, at least. Well, sorry, 16 years. Yeah.
Very cool. Glad to see you succeed. And sometimes it's just good encouragement for others to see kind of what people go through. And one of the interesting things I find about failing sometimes is sometimes you fail, you end up in such a better position than where you would have been.
Yeah.
You get to discover something you really like. You think this other was the end all be all, and that was what you should do. And then you find out something you like so much better. You're passionate about it and you excel.
Yeah, absolutely. Be okay with that failure. And if you enjoy it, you just keep doing it. And you're going to improve over time. And for me, as far as like a regimen's kind of concerned, at that time, I would spend like whatever free time I had, if I'm not doing anything, if you're not working, if whatever, right? If you just make the time, even if it's just like half an hour to an hour a day, just be like, I'm going to do this for a while, right? If it's creating a virtual machine, if it's playing around with malware in that virtual machine, even if you put that in there and it's like, I have no idea what's happening. Well, you're already being exposed to learning about it, right? And even if it's a half hour to an hour a day and you have time for that instead of watching, an extra, TV show, right? Before bed or whatever, right? You're improving just an incremental, tiny steps. And that's okay too, right? If you have a busy life, you have kids, you have, other things going on in your life in regards to family or other obligations, right? Half hour to an hour a day, I would say, put on your calendar, let it ping you once a day and be like, hey, silly, go practice, the thing you're interested in, that there's opportunities in, that you're also passionate about. And, if you don't get it that one day, well, you know what, it'll ping you the next day. And, keep yourself on track with improving yourself. I think also too, like documenting this for yourself is also good because you can start to see your progress, right? Especially if you work on creating your own portfolio. And that's another thing I would have done differently that I suppose I didn't mention is as soon as I created a LinkedIn account, that's when people wanted to hire me. I was completely out of the LinkedIn game entirely, right? I just, printed out my resume and faxed it to people or mailed it. Not even kidding, right? Because, I grew up in the 90s, right? Well, as a kid, and, I suppose I was semi out of touch technologically on the professional social networks, but just even posting some things that I could do, even if it's like, hey, look, I figured out this cool thing on my own, and I hope you guys like it, and just post it, right? And people see value in that, especially employers, because just looking at a resume, sure, you look at it as like, oh, okay, skill boxes are checked, but sometimes just being able to see how that person thinks, how they work, how they approach different problems, and can see that output, right? Really pushes that value that you have, right? Your value, you're showcasing your value to the to potential employers and the world, I guess, which is, that beats a resume any day in my mind.
Yeah, that's some good points because sometimes some of the things you can share on your LinkedIn profile or your GitHub or some videos that you record walkthroughs or some of the things you're working on, it kind of gives you a step up on your competition because some cases they just got the LinkedIn profile of the resume and it would require them to come in for an interview to get to display those technical skills by some type of skills assessment. If they don't get to that point, then, they're not going to have a very good chance of getting there. And, it's really difficult to do even outside of, the way you used to do it, fax or mailing. If you look at the way people do things nowadays, going to the job site, applying for it, there's so many cases you don't even get an interview. It's just really hard to get past that.
Yeah, the interview process is hard. I mean, later on in my career, it got, after I got laid off from my last job in cyber, when I put out, I just like posted on Twitter, it's like, yo, I've been laid off. And I'm sure there's more people, at times being laid off here. There's, some of that going around. The market's changing. I think there's some consolidation and stuff happening. But things are in flux, but that doesn't essentially mean there's no opportunities out there, right? But I think, yep, totally lost it. What were we talking about?
Yeah, you're just talking about how uploading your resumes to the job sites, trying to get a job. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes, yeah, I learned this the hard way too, that when I started uploading resumes, sometimes you have to sign into all these different websites, right? Because everyone has their own type of platform, which is annoying on its own. But sometimes, depending on the size of the company, there's digital paper shredders that will, if your resume does not contain a certain amount of keywords, it gets thrown out, right? Gone. No one sees it. So, I think, being sure that when you're applying that, reading those posts and seeing what kind of terminology that they're using, words they're using, and trying to meet those. As well as I've seen a lot of people, they'll go to apply, they'll look at the list, right? They'll say, you need Wireshark experience, Snort Suricata experience, right? You need Python, some Python scripting experience. You need, right? And these are listed as skills, right? But sometimes there's like just one in there, like that they're missing. Maybe they're missing Wireshark or whatever, as an example. If you're missing just like a couple items, what do you have to lose by applying? Nothing. You have nothing to lose by applying, right? Because who knows? Maybe they're a bit more desperate than you think, right? Maybe they have it there and it's a wish list item, or like maybe they can train in it, right? So a lot of analytical minds will, I find, look at these lists, itemized lists of what these employers are asking for. And if one's missing, they're like, well, I guess I can't apply to that one. Let's have a look at the next one, which, in reality is not exactly, how that works. If you apply to that job anyway, and let's say you do this for, let's say hundreds, thousands of employers, whatever, you're widening your probability that you're going to get a bite, right? You're just casting your line out there many more times, right? If you have no job, no prospect, then, you're just upping, you're rolling the dice. Eventually, hopefully, right, you're going to get a good roll and you're going to get that interview, right? That's kind of the way I kind of think of it, as like a game of probabilities. You have nothing to lose by applying. What's the worst thing they can tell you? No, that's it. There's nothing worse they can tell you.
So for someone that wanted to be a malware analyst, what would you recommend as far as a learning path for that?
So first off, I like to say everyone's learning path, if depending on how they learn, can be a little bit different. But the one I would recommend having a look at would be to at least get some practice in. There's so many open source resources out there. So one I would recommend is, well, you can hop over to my YouTube channel off of my blog and check that out. I got some educational videos on there. Another one is Malware Analysis for Hedgehogs, which is another great YouTube channel by Karnstein. He's really great. As well, I would recommend OA Labs, which is with Sergey on YouTube. And he also has a Patreon as well, which has a bunch of more premium videos in there for learning resources. But this is how I learned, right? Just YouTube, Udemy, like, as cheap as I could get it, right? And Google. And then as well, of course, I think practicing that. So I've had a lot of people who said, oh, I want to start analyzing malware, and said, well, great. And I asked them how things are like the next year, say going to a conference like the security conferences. Yeah, you mentioned you were interested in malware analysis. Have you, how's that been going? You said you're going to start, and you're like, well, I had no idea how to get started. I said, well, did you create a virtual machine or a VM? You're like, well, no. Well, VMs are literally the gateway drug to malware analysis. So even if it's just creating one like Windows virtual machine, or depending on what type of malware you're looking at, for me it was Windows malware. So creating that virtual machine and finding some open source resources or free resources to download malware samples. So some of those would be like Malware Bazaar, VX Underground is another resource, AnyRun, which is a sandboxing service, Hybrid Analysis, Triage, and Cape. Again, more sandboxes that allow you to download certain samples for free. And of course, Twitter. So what I used to do is I would find some post on Twitter like, hey, look at this cool malware. I don't know what it is. And I was just like, sweet, I'm just going to take that, download it, put it in my VM and see what I can find, right? And what I ended up doing is I would quote tweet these and provide additional findings that I was able to identify maybe the malware family or other interesting analysis points about the malware's behavior and document those in a tweet. So helping out the open source community or the InfoSec community on Twitter, if you will, but at the same time, being able to take that and put it into your portfolio so that you can use that as well for, making sure that people can see, your progress and, the value that you bring to the table in your analysis with your particular sets of skills. So I would say I kind of took this two-pronged approach to it, right? Where you're helping the community, but you're also in turn helping yourself, building your own portfolio as well as your own skills. So it's pretty well a win-win for both you as well as the community that's out there.
Great advice. We're getting down towards the end of the show. Is there anything you'd like to share before we end?
Oh, yes. Don't look at failure like the end. Take a different approach to failure and learn to train yourself to accept it and accept it as part of the process. And I think, that will push anyone a bit further ahead. And yeah, stay determined. And I hope to see you on my Twitch streams as well as YouTube or my blog or wherever else. And yeah, thank you very much for having me, Phil, and pretty cool podcast you got going on here.
Thanks for joining. It was an honor to have you on the show. I was super impressed when we met at the conference, and it was good to have you on sharing your advice for others. So thanks so much for joining.
Absolutely. Thanks.
And for everyone listening, we'll be sharing the links to her blog, social media, YouTube, and Twitch. So thanks, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to The Philip Wiley Show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. In the meantime, to learn more about Philip, go to thehackermaker.com and connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter @Philip Wiley. Until next time.